Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Future Africa Vision from Nigeria and Uganda. It's going to be a family conversation for us here today, in that we all know each other. I've worked with Chinelo. I and Chikọdili went to school together, and I've been a fan, big fan of Dilman for years, and we've met a couple of times. So it's going to be a very free-flowing conversation. My name is Mazi. I'm the co-founder of Omenana magazine, which is a speculative fiction magazine that is open for Africans and Africans in diaspora. To start off, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves by themselves, starting with Chikọdili.
No! Hi, I'm Chikọdili Emelumadu. I am Nigerian and I'm also from the UK. I've been published in a few magazines like Omenana, which was founded by Mazi, Nwonwu, and Chinelo, Onwalu as well. And I think Dilman was also in my. Were we in the same edition of Omenana? Basically, we all know each other, like Mazi has said.
Yeah. I think we were.
Yes. And I have a book coming out, hopefully, fingers crossed, next year. That's all I have to say about myself for now.
Good, thank you. Dilman?
Okay. I think I always have issues introducing myself because I never know.
Should I do it for you? Dilman is a superstar Ugandan filmmaker and horror writer. Should I do it for you?
I am not a superstar. No, normally I don't know.
Don't be humble now.
I normally don't know where to focus on, whether to talk about film or digital arts or whatever, but I think this is mostly about writing, so I should talk more about me as a writer. I think I'm just going to say about a few, mostly I've been doing a lot of short stories and novellas at the most. I'm yet to put out a novel. And because, short stories are easier to work with and, they're in this hectic life, I find it more comfortable to work on something shorter. So this year, I put out my first, it's not first fantasy novel. I did a fantasy. Yeah, it is a first fantasy. I don't know if it's the first or the second, but yeah, I did a novella this year, a fantasy book. Maybe we'll talk about it as during as you come up with other questions. And then another novella is coming out next year. So the first one is called Abiba, and it's kind of based on the mythology I grew up in from my mother's people in northern parts of Uganda. And then there's another novella coming out next year called The Featured God of Love from Luna Press. I could say I've been listed in a few awards here and there, but I've never won anything, which is nice. I want to get a record of somebody who's been listed and never got anything, like most listed but never won anything. It would be a nice record to have. Yeah.
It will be something soon. Thank you, Dilman. Chinelo.
Hi, everyone. I am an author, a editor, and a scriptwriter. Now I can put that on my list. Mazi and I actually helped co-found Omenana, and I am currently the nonfiction editor for Anathema magazine. I am a freelance writer and editor, and like Dilman, I've been nominated for a lot of things, but I've never won anything. I do mostly short stories, actually, so far, just short stories. And my short stories have appeared in a lot of different places. Actually, that's not true. One of my short stories appeared in an anthology, New Sons, and the anthology won a Locus Award, I think last year or earlier this year. That was nice. But I did not personally win it. So Can I claim it? I don't know. Sure.
You have, I think you can.
Can I claim it? Can I claim it?
Yes.
Okay, I want a locus.
Like
Yes,
claiming anything.
yes, I claimed it.
Okay, so I've already introduced myself. I'm Mazi Nwonwu. I co-founded Omenana with Chinelo. I'm also a journalist. I work with BBC Igbo language service in Nigeria. I've been writing science fiction for a while, just speculative fiction, so to say, for a while. But like Dilman and maybe Chinelo, I've not won anything. And I struggle to write because my day job takes so much of my time. And I just struggle between the two words. So to kick it off, I want to start by looking at what's the major focus of this panel is, which is Future Africa. So what are the visions of Nigeria from the Nigerian? So I'm looking at something that happened a couple of years ago when Ayo Aribabu, who I worked with at the time, he's also a writer of speculative in Nigeria. He had a couple of us come together to work on an anthology that looked at Lagos 50 years from that year. And then we came up with all sorts of stories about the future, some about futures where we expect that we sort of, people we basically are thinking that the future is going to be very, very clean. So they had stories that we are like not, what's the word for it in English? Is this dystopic, more or less? That's what
Utopic,
we had. But yeah, so that's what we had from a lot of people contributed. But I want to ask a question to the panelists. If we are looking at future Africa, what do you think the goal is for speculative fiction, maybe science fiction in itself, in predicting and shaping an African future? So anybody can chip in.
I think that the actual bent of a utopia for an African future is correct. Okay, because given the history that we've had on the African continent, in a lot of African countries, it's been largely violent, and and I don't even mean violent through our own making. I mean through colonialism. Okay, like let's get that clear. So it's been largely negative in that we are the resource to be bartered, traded, pilfered, whatever. So I think that it's very likely that given all that history that we've had, that the science fiction coming out of Africa would be largely utopic. Not for me personally, but that's because I think that if there's one thing that might be a bit dystopic in that body of work, it would be all the environmental stuff. And that has to do with the realities of what we're dealing with. Now, a few years ago, I remember they had this BBC show where they had paid for, like through the proper channels here in the UK, paid for a computer to be disposed of. And then they tracked this computer all the way to a dump in Ghana, okay? And largely, it's sort of like a common refrain for a lot of African countries, especially the ones that have ports, Lagos, where have you. A lot of our countries become dumping grounds for technology. Now, it might very well be that we could have stories that are influenced by scavengers making stuff from a lot of the stuff that's been dumped. But for me, I think there would be there will be an environmental bent to things, because we have a lot more people now who are aware of the dangers of, all the dumping, all the excessive usage, all the, and it's not as if, I mean, I'm not here to preach about environmentalism, because for a lot of people on the ground, the reality is that they are not really able to do the stuff that we do here over in the UK, all the recycling stuff. They don't have that luxury in quotes, okay? But I think that a lot of our science fiction will have an environmental focus, and will also probably have people doing things with scavenged technology or using technology in really surprising ways that it's not been meant for, or people over here in this part of the world are not really using technology in that way. I think that will happen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chikọdili. Chinelo, what do you think?
I want to kind of like piggyback off of that, because I agree. When we were reading stories from Omenana, we always saw utopias. We rarely saw dystopias. And I think that's because when the West imagines a dystopia, they're imagining our realities for the most part, right? They're imagining, the kind of environmental devastation that is much more obviously seen when you when you walk down the street in Nigeria, you can see people dumping their stuff. Same the kind of dumping happens here, is just hidden, right? And also recycling is a lie. I have an article, I'll share it with you guys. But for real, the thing is, nobody has ever bothered to really consider a utopia for Africa. When the Western imagination imagines Africa, it keeps it where it is and projects where it is far, far into the future. So when you think about the language around mitigating climate change, it's always that, Africa will be the worst hit. And maybe that's true, but those kinds of statements preclude the ability of Africans to mitigate climate change for ourselves and to find solutions that we're already doing that will actually lead us to better places. It assumes that all change and all improvement will be coming in from outside the continent that we should then accept and be grateful for, which is just racist. Let's be frank about it. And when we imagine our futures for ourselves, obviously we imagine something better than what we see today, right? I like to think of a lot of the future focused science fiction I read, and I'm still reading out of Africa, reminds me of the kind of golden age science fiction that was written in the West in like the 50s and 60s. Lots of, I remember when we were putting together, I think edition 10, and there was flying cars everywhere, Biafra and flying cars. That was the main thing. And that was like the big thing for people. So I think that to be an African in the world is to be relentlessly optimistic. You have to be able to see what you experience our world as it is and say, there can be something better. Otherwise, why bother waking up in the morning, right?
Exactly.
And that is reflected in our fiction. When we write our stories and when we write ourselves into the future, first of all, it's a radical act to do so, to write ourselves into the future, because so many futures written by people who are not us don't even bother including us, right?
Yeah.
You have visions of like a solar punk Europe or whatever, and nobody ever, it's like Africa just stopped existing at some point.
Well, the only time they include us, just to kind of like jump in, is when they suddenly have to have a fresh new start, right? And somehow we all mysteriously have died. And look, Africa is available for you guys to move to. The song, the end credits, people sailing off into the sunset, literally. But go on, please.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous, right? It's part of that radical act of being, I think, any kind of Black person in the world, is that you have to radically write yourself into the future. No one else is going to do it for you. In fact, there are lots of people hoping that we will just somehow evaporate with, the only times that whenever I read about, because I do a lot of research around climate change, and whenever I read the reports coming out of Europe and North America, the only way we're ever framed is as climate refugees. However, if you look at the demographic data, if you look at the economic data projected into, just say, the next 50 years, you're looking at Africa being the place where all human resource is going to be coming out of. Everywhere else in the world, population growth has slowed or stagnated. We are the only people growing our populations.
Right.
If countries want to continue growing, if they want to have that economic success that they envision for themselves, they're going to have to get the human resources out of Africa. Guess what? You know, and right there already, you're considering a shift of power that the West just simply does not ever consider. So we are utopic, and what we write is utopic. How we are in the world is utopic, and that's reflected in everything that we do. There's my
I had a question. I have a question about like when you talked about reading a lot of Biafra flying cars, right? How much of that is how much of that is influenced by the secondhand literature that we get in Nigeria, you know, being a lot of like the old stuff being cleared out of libraries over here, over in North America, etc. How much of that influence do you think could be from the classic science fiction?
Yeah, no, I mean, when I started reading science fiction in, you know, as a, you know, elementary school student in Lagos, it was, you know, Asimov, it was Clark, it was all these like golden era guys, right? And I don't know about other people, but that in some ways fundamentally shaped my understanding of the genre. In a lot of ways, it's also meant that I've had to like reach in and dig out some like really like sexist and racist ideas that were embedded in there. But I think that might have, yeah, it might very well have had to do with it. Yeah. Dilman, what about you? What was your experience?
About the flying cars?
Do you have any?
No, we don't have any. But I think just maybe to pick up from your question, I believe Hollywood has influenced a lot of writing, especially science fiction writing. So I tried running a publication once. It was called Lavino Magazine, and then I shut it down because it was too much work. But most of it wasn't purely speculative, but most of the speculative stories I got were kind of remakes of, you know, popular speculative fiction. And that's really, yeah, in many cases when I see people writing about Africa and about the future, most of the stories are kind of versions of American lives and European lives. They are not really projections of how Africans can, or like what an African community can look like if they overcome all these 100 or 200 years of, you know, colonialism and brainwashing and all that you get. So people would imagine a futuristic Lagos or the utopic Lagos will be one which has electricity and which has flying cars and which has, you know, things working the way it is working in New York or in Toronto or somewhere else. But they're not going to imagine a Kampala where the traditional knowledge systems have kind of become dominant and our education systems have been overhauled, and we are now learning, not of course resetting it back to 100 years back, but, you know, just valuing the knowledge systems that we had and the stuff that we have. I see very little of that coming out of our fictions. Most of the time, if you look at many of the comics which are being written, Nigeria, of course, dominates, and South Africa as well. But many of them, they hardly utilize local knowledges, if I can put it that way. Like it's always a version of Captain America or a version of Superman or a version of the X-Men that is being given a Nigerian name or something like that. So, and yet when you really look at the continent and what's happening there, like there is all this, like you say, the environmental stuff that's coming up. And it's just even not environmental stuff. Some of it is going to be climate change related, but much of it is going to be technological related, like either effects coming from the overdumping of electronic goods, overdumping of batteries and stuff like that. But then there is also genetic modification, which is happening at an alarming rate. And there is a lot of tests being done. Of course, now they are saying they are releasing mosquitoes in Florida. But you remember, Africa has like always been their target. There was this company, Target Malaria, that wants to modify mosquitoes, I think, in 4 countries. I don't remember where that ended up, but they had plans to test this in Burkina Faso, I think, first, either this year or next year. So of course, very little is talked about that, but the moment they talk about it going in Florida, you see it is all over the headlines and stuff like that. So yeah, in my ideal world, or probably really what I write about most, I try to imagine these futures where we have somehow we are valuing stuff that is African, from knowledge systems to cultural institutions to the way things are done outside of Western or Asian ways of doing things. One thing I keep having hope on is okay, I'll talk about a short story of mine that is coming out soon, and it's an idea that has really bugged me, and it's about democracy. And when we think of democracy, we think of it in terms of what we've been defined as democracy. You have a leader, you elect this leader every 5 years, and this leader kind of promises to do good and is not corrupt and all that, and people will say that that is democracy, and yet we know it really is not democracy. I keep looking back into the past. I'm not saying it was all glorious back then, but there were many nations in Africa that did not have centralized leadership. My mother's people, there were about 2 million, maybe even 3 million at the time the colonialists were coming. And of course, they were not one political unit, but they were also one nation, if that makes sense. They were not a political unit the way you know Nigeria or Uganda today, but they were a nation. Like they knew, oh, we are Acholi, oh, we are Langi. And if I read the history text correctly, there was a nation called the Bunyoro. They were actively fighting a war against the British. So the Banyoro, they asked the Langi for help. The Banyoro had a king and a central leadership, but the Langi did not have any king or any central leadership. But then somehow they mobilized themselves and they gave a lot of support to the Banyoro to fight against the British. So there were systems, and there are systems of governance which have been lost, in time, and we don't know how these systems used to work, but there were problems with them. I can't say they were utopic, but we can borrow a lot from this kind of systems and imagine a future of Africa where we have democracy that is running very much along this kind of things. Like, it's not a centralized leadership, but it's a huge country like Nigeria with 200 million people, but functioning without a central leadership. And when I see how technology is improving, or just the pace at which technology is changing, with mobile phones and stuff like that, it's going to enable direct democracy. It's going to make direct democracy much, much more possible. We already have versions of this in things like Twitter, though, of course, this kind of, it can get out of hand and it becomes mob justice. But, there is already something, or the foundations of direct democracy. And what I would really love to see more and more people writing about, or more science fiction writers imagining African futures, it will be to borrow from the past and imagine what the future will be like, to borrow from our cultures, to borrow from our languages, and all that.
Okay, great.
All right, got my thing is going on.
Okay, it's fine. So there's a question that came in that I think is central to what the conversation I have been on about Utopias and Dystopias. So it's from the Lonely Bird. the question is, are African utopias different from US, European, Chinese utopias? Then if yes, how do you imagine utopias in your own work? So I think this goes to all of us as writers. So if you are going to imagine utopia in your work, how do you imagine that? How do you do it?
Can I go first?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me go first. I think I actually rarely see anything as utopia or dystopia, because utopias and dystopias are basically a point of view. They are very subjective, and you can't tell anyone that this is a utopia and this is a dystopia and that will be it. And I never see any human society that is ever going to be a utopia, because or just because of the nature human beings are created, or the way life on this planet evolved, we are hierarchical people. Like, we always have strata. We have, this person is above me, this person is below me, this person is, my peer. So as long as you have that kind of strata, and it's kind of hardwired in all life forms in this planet. So just that alone is going to make utopias become really impossible. So whether you have a socialist state, or whether you have a capitalist state, or whatever form of political organization you have, there is going to be something that someone is not going to like. There's going to be something that is going to oppress somebody. I think instead of aiming for utopias, I always imagine systems or futures where I don't know, not even just the basic human rights being respected, because even human rights, I see them as subjective things which change depending on the environment and the societies people live in. But just a future where systems at least enable a good majority of people to have a good life, if I can put it that way. I would call that a utopia in a way.
Yeah, but even the word good is subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
I actually would challenge that completely. Like, the idea that we can't have a society that we can only have societies with hierarchies. I think that that is a challenge to the imagination, and that's something that we as writers should really examine and push back against, especially whenever I hear someone tell me you can't have that because human nature is X. That tells me that, you have sort of agreed to a certain way of looking at people that may not necessarily be true. There are plenty of examples of decentralized systems where there aren't these kinds of rigid hierarchies, who's on top, who's below. Rather, they are networks of respect, where respect is accorded based on what the person is bringing to a community, or based on their accumulated knowledge of life, for instance. And when I see that happening, that tells me that there is obviously something in human nature that allows that to be. Otherwise, you would never see any examples of it, right? And so when it's interesting that we're asking a question about utopias and dystopias, and I agree that it is a matter of perspective. Someone's dystopia is always going to be someone's utopia. Someone's utopia is always going to be someone's dystopia. Who that person is, though, is super important, right? If the person whose desire is to dominate and oppress sees a society where domination and oppression doesn't really exist, that person's going to view it as a dystopia. It's going to be a terrible thing for them. That doesn't necessarily make that society a dystopia, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges for futurists, and I 100% agree that we don't take into account non-Western ways of viewing societal structure. We have a lot of us, all of us really, because I always say this, white supremacy is the soup we are all swimming in. We are all internalized these certain structures about what is and what isn't. And that oftentimes takes the form of what it is white people have decided. And unlearning that is a really, really long and hard process. And yes, there are, like you pointed out, that, you know, the Igbo also, for most of us, we didn't have any centralized government, and yet we understood ourselves as a people. We understood ourselves as a distinct people, separate from the Yoruba, the Efik, and whatever. We didn't have a president. We didn't have a king. Well, my people, well, Onisha did, but that's a whole other issue there. And so,
most didn't have a king.
and so, yeah. When we think about how we use our imagination to think about the future, you're right. We don't utilize, or we don't think hard enough about non-Western, non-hierarchical ways of thinking. I actually wrote a story where I challenged myself to create a society that didn't have hierarchy. And that was really, 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 really hard. In fact, the only thing I could manage was about 1,500 words, because I was like, if someone asked me to now, you know, how is the daily life in this world, I'm going to struggle. So I'm just going to sketch it out for you. And one of the challenges I will give to myself is to go back into that world and figure out how daily life actually functions, you know, because we need more of those stories in the world. Right now, the people telling the stories are the people who benefit from the systems as is. So when they think about the collapse of these systems, what they tell us is, oh, it will be chaos. Oh, it was going to be, you know, rioting on the streets. People will be shooting each other. There'll be dead bodies, and it'll be the Walking Dead. That's a lie. That's a pure lie. First of all, because societies that have collapsed did not happen in those societies without the outside actions of agitators, usually. So we know that already these visions are, you know, coming from a very particular place, being told by very particular people for the sole purpose of keeping us where we are and locked into the systems that really ultimately don't benefit us. So when we think about utopias, an African utopia, I don't think that is the question we should be asking. I think the question we should be asking is, whose utopia are we thinking of? Whose dystopia and whose utopia do we have right now? And then work to challenge that and say, maybe there's a different way of thinking. And that's everyone's, that's basically everybody's, you know, mandate, really.
Okay, thank you very much, Chinelo. So I think we're going to move at a much faster pace now because, yeah, we've broken the ice. So let's kind of be a little bit faster. So one important thing that I think people want to know about is that what are we doing in Africa? Are we writing speculative fiction? Are we writing literary fiction? What informs the fiction that we write? And one thing that I think all of us have experienced is coming out as writers of the speculative, or saying I write science fiction, saying I write fantasy, and people not really sort of taking you serious because, like I used to say, people tend to look at speculative fiction as the younger, less known brother of literary fiction. I know a couple of friends here in Nigeria who are great writers who I know in their spare time will only read science fiction, but they don't write it. They don't write it because like there's this view that if you write it, you're not very serious. For you to be serious, you need to like make your words sing like Achebe would do or Soyinka would do. So I want to start with Chinelo. Why do you think more people are sort of coming out these days to say in Africa or in Nigeria to say I'm a speculative fiction writer, I write speculative fiction, and say with pride too?
I think it has to do with the fact that they are seeing other Africans going out and being successful. One of it's kind of a sad thing, but like our people often, you know, will wait until we like the sure thing. We don't want to be the first person out there like doing the thing that nobody else has done before that might fail, and then we'll have to go back to our people and be like, yeah, so I tried this thing and it failed, sorry. But I think a big part of it actually has to do with times are changing, generations are moving. the kinds of literatures I think that our parents read and then, and their generation wrote, they had a very different viewpoint, and they had very different concerns. Our generation, we grew up watching movies. We grew up watching, Superman. We grew up reading comics, many of us. And as I think the power dynamics start to shift a little bit, you start seeing people, especially as you get older as a writer, you're less inclined to write stuff that doesn't interest you, right? And as you get more, how would I put it, more confident in your own writing ability, you're more likely to then write the things that excite you, right? I also think that having, let's say, the African Speculative Fiction Society as a way of like formalizing this sort of writing has been a real help. Having, an award system that rewards this kind of writing and recognizes it also helps. Tomi Adeyemi winning, a bid of like a 6-figure book deal. People were like, that is a thing I can do. And after that, you saw this massive explosion. It's not that we weren't writing it. It's just that maybe we were writing it, but feeling like there's nowhere for us to publish it. Nobody's interested. Also, the internalized idea that, okay, this is fluff. If I want to write serious work, I should be writing about the healthcare system of Nigeria. And when I started writing out, I had that same, and the thing is, Mazi, you and I, having Omenana as this place where people could come in and write, also I think really helped legitimize it as a form of writing that people could take seriously. So more venues are opening up, more recognition, more money is coming in to the genre. People are gonna write. It's, supply and demand, I think.
Sure. Okay, Chinelo, before you go, so people want to know where they can find your story when you talked about hierarchy.
Oh, it's a small story. It's called When We Call a Place Home. It was part of the Us in Flux project with the Arizona State University. They did this like little thing where they published microfiction that was examining ways that we could recover from catastrophe, basically. So a lot of people sort of wrote very different things, but I wanted to know how we could recover from, if society collapsed today, what would rise in its ashes? Most people assume that what will rise is some kind of like theocracy or a strongman leader, or or we'll start eating each other in the streets. But I thought, what comes after this is better, and that sort of got me thinking about that. So it's called When We Call a Place Home. It's the Us in Flux project. I'll put the link in the chat for everyone.
Cool. Chikọdili, you are one of those who we are very, very proud of being writers of this speculative. You didn't hide that, you kind of hyped it. I remember how excited we were when we set up Omenana. You're one of the first people who came to shout and say, wow, some people are doing this stuff, I'm excited. So why did you feel that much confidence, which I sort of found lacking in a lot of writers who didn't want to own the fact that they write speculative fiction or science fiction or fantasy in Africa?
I don't know. I just don't care what people think. I don't know. I don't know. That's an odd question.
But why do
I don't know. I think
I also want to know.
Yes, I think that
I also want to know why do we sort of push back on science fiction, fantasy writing in
yeah, I think like Chinelo said,
Africa.
is because people consider it to be unserious, right? It doesn't help that I was reading this thing where Chimamanda Adichie apparently said how she didn't like things of that nature because it felt as if you were cheating somehow, like because you would imagine this thing and then you would have this solution. And I was thinking, what?
Sorry.
Have you ever tried to write in this genre?
Thank you.
Try it, and then let me see how you can imagine the ending. I was like, look, sis, like I respect you, but no, what are you saying? And I think also that what we consider to be speculative fiction has always been done. You see, I'm of the view that people were just, listen, it's basically, it's come from a publishing point of view, right? So Achebe, for instance, would write his Things Fall Apart, Man of the People, blah, blah, blah. It has the politics in it. It has the, you know, a lot of like the time, the feel of the time in it. But it also had strong, what we consider speculative fiction elements. And the reason for that is we as Africans do not have that dichotomy between real life and speculative, okay? It's all life, it's all in there. And so when Achebe et al. Were getting published, it was down to how they were marketed and published that people thought, I'm going to write this. So you have a lot of like critical theory and like deconstruction and analysis centering around the colonialism versus traditionalism, and nobody's talking about all the speculative elements. That's why people don't see that it's there. But in Igbo society, I don't need to tell you guys, 3 out of 4 of us are Igbo, okay? In Igbo society, we dwell very, very closely with things that we cannot see, right? And so when I think about speculative fiction, I'm not only thinking about all the technology that you can see and you can touch, right? I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, there are worlds out there, and this is something that my forthcoming novel deals with, is the fact that there are worlds out there existing alongside ours, whose members want to touch ours. They want to touch ours because it's hard moving on from a plane of existence to another plane of existence. It's sort of like how you hear these stories about kids who would tell their parents things about, oh, before I was born, I was in this place, and then I saw your face, and then I came to you and you became my mommy. And it freaks people out. And it's like, yeah, but why not? What if there is another plane of existence and these kids have just not giving up that link? There's still that link, and so they're able to sort of, and then we come into what we call the Obanje as well. We have that. It's basically kids who should not remember a previous life and do, okay? Or people who remember several previous lives. And so all those speculative fiction elements have always been there. It's just they were tagged something else. They were tagged folklore or mythology. And now we know better.
Or magical realism. That's my favorite.
Or magical realism. Don't even get me started. but now we know better. We understand that. And so when Dilman is talking about, oh, we want to go back to a community or to a way of thinking that is authentically ours, it also is things like this, you know, like lifestyles that do not just preclude all other ones that we cannot see. We're not a people that are visual only. Igbo people, especially like Africans, we're not just visual. You know, that little like, oh, your hackles are rising. People will say, oh, it's a primitive response. We don't say it's a primitive response. We run. We know that there's something that we cannot see and our body can perceive. Do you understand what I mean? So it's all those things that I grew up in that's probably made me the way I am, because I didn't understand that there was a serious way of writing, because all the writers I read growing up did the same thing. Achebe did it, Vincent Chukwuemeka did it in Bottled Leopards, Cyprian Ekwensi did it, Elechi Amadi did it. They all did it. They had all these elements in their stories because it is part. And so when you grow up in that kind of environment, you learn very quickly that speculative is just a label. It doesn't really like. So if you're somebody who's considering writing and you say, oh, I look down on speculative fiction, what are you really looking down on yourself? Okay, so I think it was all in there, and so that's what I would say has given me that confidence. I don't really see it as confidence. I just see that I'm just writing reality. I'm writing life. You know, so if you're writing life, then you know it doesn't really matter what other people think, because this is my reality. This is what I grew up with. So that's what it is, really.
Okay, thank you.
If I add,
I'll come to you.
Mhm.
Okay, good. Yeah, I want to come to you, and I want to come to you from a different perspective.
Okay.
and that has to do with us. So for a long time, like Chinelo said, Chikọdili just mentioned about how aspects of the speculative had always been in our folk tales, had always been in our life, the life of our ancestors, one way or the other. But there's always this idea of being discovered. So these days people say the coming of African speculative fiction as if we just started doing it yesterday, as if it's a new thing. Even though, like I always say, all the first books published in Nigeria, that's Dio Fagoma, Forest of the Thousand Demons, can actually stand to with any book that you can think that is a speculative fiction masterpiece. So why does it appear as if we're just being rediscovered every other year?
I think it's actually what I was going to say, in addition to what Chico said. We are in a system where we validate ourselves based on somebody else's point of view. Like here, our lives are like in Uganda, you see in the headlines, you see headlines in the national newspapers like a witch doctor is suing the Speaker of Parliament because she failed to pay, or she has refused to pay for services he rendered her to help her to power. You get, and you find headlines.
Pay your witch doctors, people. Pay your witch doctors.
Service.
Yeah. So you find headlines where there are zombies being eaten. In Uganda, we eat zombies; they don't eat us.
That's where the zombie apocalypse ends.
So you find the stuff like Chico said, between reality and fiction is, or what you call speculative fiction and reality. It's kind of blurred. But we've been brought up in this system, which makes us believe that what we think or what we believe in is not worth it, or like it's inferior to what somebody else believes in. So because people think they are Christians, then they cannot give, what's the word? They can't validate the existence of Banje by writing about them or by reading a story about them. Yeah. So this kind of thing is what actually has pushed speculative fiction really back into the shelves of folklore, mythology, stories for children, and stuff like that. But why it is coming up now again is because of the same system. Because now, what's the Hollywood company? Disney? Who did Black Panther?
Marvel.
Yeah,
Marvel.
Yeah,
owned by Disney, but yes.
Owned by Disney, yeah.
Yeah, but they see there is money to be made in making stuff like this. So they say, oh yeah, there's, superheroes in Africa. And then Africans go and say, oh yes, we actually have this because somebody has validated it for them. And then because now it's cool, now it's, yeah, if you remember stories of Harry Potter a few years back, and there was a backlash, among the Christians and stuff like that.
The Pentecostal Christians.
Yes, but you see, Black Panther and Harry Potter, what's the difference really? They are both wizards of some kind, only that one uses himself up in technology, or one has been packaged for you nicely in a form that any Muslim or Christian in Africa is going to accept it. So I think that is really the biggest thing of why people are now, like everybody now is writing science fiction, everybody now is writing, because the West has kind of begun accepting or validating these kind of stories. Yeah.
So to add to your point, Dilman, about like Thor. So Thor for me Thor and Black Panther have those elements I talk about, which is something that I think we're going to be doing more of, where there is not that split between science and the supernatural. Because in Black Panther, they had all that, they had all the Kimoyo beats, they had, what's it called again? Oh no, I just watched it. But they had all that technology at their fingertips, and yet anytime he drank the purple-shaped herb, he went to another plane. You see, there's that connection between science, and likewise in Thor, he had Mjolnir, the hammer, and they had the Bifrost, which was supposed to take them to other worlds. But they were also like technologically advanced, and at the same time, you had a brother that was a shapeshifter, and so it's just it's all interconnected. It's just where one part of the world, had all their stuff elevated to classics, all the Grecian classics, all the Roman classics, all the Norse classics, and then the rest of us, we don't study, we're not classic. Can you see my face? We're not classic. We're kind of like, all our animals talk. It's only when the animals talk that we are accepted. They do henya, and then, that's the only time that, so it's left for us to do these things for ourselves, because like Chinelo said, you're not waiting for anybody to do that for you. If you don't do that yourself, you're still going to be relegated to the background. So I think that you're right in that people are becoming more accepting of speculative fiction because there is money in it, because obviously, but it's also worth noting that it's always been there, and it's just been given another kind of like shape to it, another kind of like, it's been packaged differently, but it's the same story. It's the same thing, all through. We're just waking up to our potential now, which is, it's sad, but it's happening at least. So let's be grateful and happy.
So the one word answer to your question, Mazi, is racism. 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 That's why they're rediscovering us every 5 years. Racism.
Yeah, but I can also add, there is also a bit of hope, or I don't know if I should call it hope, but people also in Africa, like, they love consuming this kind of stories, and so, like, we saw it in Nollywood. Like, a lot of Nollywood stories were very much speculative, but they were being packaged as real life stories. Yeah. So there's already an audience for this kind of stuff, and they just needed a nudge, from Marvel, from that. Oh yeah, keep looking deeper into it, and I think that is what is opening a lot of people's appetite for speculative stories. But also, just the more we write this kind of stories, which are not exactly remakes of Hollywood or Western stories, the more people appreciate that there is more to science fiction than just superheroes and explosions and CGI stuff. There is a lady who recently reviewed my most recent novella, that is Abiba, and she posted on Twitter that she did not like, or she had a very, she had the same like contempt for speculative fiction before she read my first book, A Killing in the Sun. And what she said is, after reading it, she was like, why are people calling this science fiction? Because she was not seeing anything science fiction in it. And then she realized that, science fiction is much more than just having superheroes and people, doing all this magic stuff. And science fiction is about really talking about humanity from all perspectives, like just commenting on what it means to be a human being. And so that is what it is for her. And now she's a big science fiction fan. And she reviewed my book, and she has reviewed a lot of African speculative fiction books. She's not yet a big reviewer, but I'm proud that at least I kind of, brought somebody in. So that is the kind of hope that, or the light that I'm seeing in all this, that though the Western stuff and Hollywood and all that are helping, if like really good speculative fictions keep coming out of the continent, which are not remakes of, Western, like Marvel stuff, then more and more people are going to appreciate more and more African fictions. Yeah.
Thank you, Dilman. So, you mentioned Nollywood. So in Nollywood, we know that there is a lot of speculative fiction elements in what they do, but they write for the people. So they write for an African audience, and
Yeah, yeah.
The way the stories are structured is not for a Western audience, so right within the context of the audience that they are sort of appealing to, and it works that way. So I think maybe that's why there's sort of a disconnect between the kind of stories that the West expect of us. So Juliana Ahmed asked a question that I think ties into what my next question would be. So she asks, when you write, do you think about being read in other countries, or do you think it has a lot of readers here in my own country? Is there a concern about being read around the world? So I think this is a very, very valid question. In that, who is our audience as writers of the speculative in Africa? Who do we write for? And what informs who we write for? So Chinelo, let me start with you on that.
I think that's a terrible question for me because, to be honest, the only person I write for is myself. So if I write a thing and I like the thing, then that is the thing. I have gone toe to toe with editors who, were asking me to define and then define even more and then define even more. And then I had to draw the line because I remember one editor was like, so can you give us a hint whether Igbo is a language or a thing? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have a phrase and say they spoke it in the Igbo language, which is a language spoken. No, I'm not going to do that. Like, if by the context of this thing, you don't understand that Igbo is a language that she's speaking in, then I can't help you. Like, no. So my problem is I did try, when I first started, I tried writing stories for a more Western audience, I think. And that sort of backfired on me pretty quickly because I was writing stories that weren't very good. I've never tried to write for Nigerian audiences just because I remember when I first started, publishing, I would get like lots of questions like, okay, that's nice, but why is there a dragon? And I'm like, I can't help you with that. Like, there's a dragon in the story. It just is. So yeah, if I write a story and I like the story and it says what I'm trying to say, then the story is good. I don't really think about who else is going to read the story. I think that if you worry too much about who's reading your stories, you might hamstring yourself. That is not to say that you need to be like some writers who, if you tell them, oh, this story isn't working, or this aspect of your story isn't working, they'll say, well, it's not for you then. There are objective, elements in a story that make them less readable or more readable. And that's across the board. I will concede if a story is being published in a particular market, I will use, let's say, flip-flop instead of slippers. But if the word is coming out of a character's mouth, I'm not going to have a Nigerian character say flip-flop. That's stupid. Just because it's gonna, an American audience would understand that better. That doesn't. So I do try to balance things. I do try to make sure that my stories are readable. And that's something that you can objectively do, regardless of who your audience is. But if I'm trying too hard to market a story to a certain audience, I find that I lose something in that story. I've had issues when I was in publishing in the Nigerian side where we would get stories that were originally published or books that were originally published for like the Western markets, like UK or US. And we'd ask the authors to like, okay, can you just remove this explanation of what a market is? You're writing to Nigerians, you don't need to do that. And they would refuse because to them, the audience they wanted was not the audience that they were necessarily getting. They were kind of writing aspirationally. And I thought that was, I know their names. I have those names written down. I don't forget. So, but it does tell me that there are certain writers who are just not writing for certain audiences. They're just not doing that. And I think that to me, if you're going to write for yourself first, and then everybody else can jump on board or get off the bus as they want.
Okay, but Chikọdili, let me come to you. So, but do we need to go beyond the context of a story? If you know that akara is something you eat, do I need to tell that akara is made from beans?
See, this is why I answer this question, right? Shebi, we've been reading books. We've been reading all this while books that had nothing to do with our surroundings. And none of us ever reached for a glossary. Nobody, not one. Even all the rubbish writers that we read, they were writing in their world. They were writing about pew pew, laser beams shooting. There was snow, lots of snow, you know. Look, it took me coming back to the UK to realize that snow felt like the stuff in the freezer, you know, that soft ice in the freezer. But they didn't explain that to you. Snow was just something that fell from the sky. Okay, there was this, and we read all sorts, and we were the better for it. All we are asking people now is come to our site. Understand? Like, leave that thing you're doing, just, and people are resisting. So I don't write for anyone but myself. But I will say in this book, in the book that I've written called Dazzling, I'm writing for it's like I'm writing for my friends a little bit, because there are lots of like Easter eggs in there for like a lot of Nigerians who will get stuff, and I'm going to fight to make sure that nobody even touches them. But I think that it depends. I don't like to explain things. Like one of my earliest works was like a novella, and they wanted me to put a glossary and to kind of like have footnotes, and I just didn't like it, and I didn't want to do it. And I think that I've got a way of getting around that. I don't think I do in this book, and please pull me up if you read it and it's there, but I don't think I do the whole akara is a spice. I don't do all that, you know. And I think that for me, because I'm someone that enjoys food, right, and enjoys eating, as you can see, look at my whole body. I like to kind of like let people know. I like to let people know what the taste of it is like. So I would say maybe like it's spiced, you know, it's a spicy bean, fried bean something. I don't know if I'd do it like that. I'm just kind of like, but I like to, because if I'm putting food in a scene, there's a reason why it's there. Okay, so it's either evokes a memory or a place or something for me, and I need you to feel that. I might go as far as to say what it smells like or tastes like, and part of doing that might mean that you say what maybe one or two of the ingredients are like, knowing full well that it's enough for the people that eat the akara or eat the pepper soup or whatever. And for those that haven't ever tasted it, it's enough to pique their interest, but not like, I'm not writing it for you, so I'm not really explaining it for you. I'm doing it so that, you know, like, okay, let me give you an example. When I lived here in the UK for a while, and didn't have any visit from home or whatever, and then I got married, and then my mother came along, and I forgot what otazi tasted like. Okay, now I'm not explaining otazi to any of you. It's a leaf, it's bitter, but it's not bitter. It's not like onubu bitter. Otazi is kind of like, you eat otazi and you drink cold water, and it's like, there's something, I don't know what that quality is, right? But I sort of forgot what otazi tasted like. And so in my short stories, after I retasted otazi, after like 10 years, you know, it was enough for me to I just wanted to remind people who had also forgotten what that tasted like, you know, what that sort of, I don't know what that quality is of this. And that's the thing, I feel like I should invent a word for it, but it's not bitter. It's kind of like bitter and like slightly tingly. And people say, oh, it's like rocket. No, it's not like rocket. It's not like rockets, go away. But it's just, you know, so I would do some things sometimes to help people who have forgotten, like me, remember, but it's enough of a breadcrumb for people who haven't tasted it, knowing full well that they're not my primary target. Okay, so I'm doing it for people who I want you to be with me in this scene at this moment. you know, because you might have experienced something like this. You might have lived this experience, and this is to help you be inside it. But if you haven't lived this experience, it's enough for you to have pulled up a chair, you know? So I don't think I do the whole explanation thing. After all, I still haven't tasted what firmity tastes like. And I read that stuff in The Mayor of Casterbridge. And I just wanted this thing so much, like firmity. I thought it was like a soup. And now learning it has oats in it. Oats. Who puts oats in a soup? I don't know. But I still haven't tasted it. And I want to taste it. But it didn't stop my enjoyment of The Mayor of Casterbridge at all. It didn't, because there are enough threads of universality to link you into the story. So we should do the same.
Dilman, I think this question is very important in the sense that I've had this feedback from a lot of African writers or writers within the continent who say they write stuff and then they have to like struggle with editors saying, we don't understand this, you have to go further to explain this. And then the struggle then I think is, how do you, like Chikọdili struggled with trying to explain what Utazi is. I understand what Utazi is. I understand exactly what she's trying to say. I don't know how to put it into words myself, but I know what she's saying because I've tasted Utazi, I've tasted Onwalu. So I always feel like as a writer, if I write a story and then I say Onwalu, she ate Onwalu soup, I don't need to tell you exactly how Onwalu soup tastes like. Maybe it's just when I'm going to need to compare it with something that is Western to say Onwalu soup tastes like spinach soup. I don't have to do that. That's what I feel. It does. I know it doesn't.
Chloroquine. I don't know. That's the nearest thing. Tastes like chloroquine, but not in a pleasurable way, you know, because it's not just Onwalu taking. It's not just by itself. It's in a sauce.
Yeah,
you know, and every single component exactly acts on the leaf and changes that bitterness of the leaf. So it's still bitter, but not in. I don't know how to explain it, man.
So I think the importance of the question lies in this struggle now. So the African writer or the writer in the continent or elsewhere who is writing, can't we take the same liberty that the writer who is European or American takes when they want to write? They write, like Chikọdili said, it says snow. The African, I've not experienced snow before. I don't know what snow feels like. I've never touched it before. I've seen it in books. I've seen it in movies. I don't know what it is.
There are different kinds of snow. It's not just the one kind of snow as well.
If you say snow, if it's good enough for you to say snow for me, why is it not good enough for me to say akara? Or use whatever, something that's quite common in my own environment. So do you struggle as a writer with writing for a particular audience, or do you just want to put out your work there and then let it speak for itself?
I don't think I struggle. Oh, go on.
You're asking Chico or you're asking me?
No, I'm asking Dilman.
Okay. I've actually never struggled with how I write my stories, because I never write with the market in mind, and I never write with the publication in mind. It's only once in a while that I see the publication that has an open call and I say, oh, I should try to write something for them. But most of the cases, if I want to write a story, I'll sit down, I write that story, and then after that I begin wondering, oh, where should I send this? And in most cases, it will lie there in my hard drive for years until I find, this magazine might buy it, and then I send it to them. So most of the stories I write, like, it really depends on the context that I'm writing the stories. Like, some of them might not have any references to local cultures or local stuff. Like the one that was in the Dominion anthology, it was about a robot dog in space, so I didn't write a lot of, but the novella that I published this year, Habiba, it's very much rooted in many cultures of Uganda. And so a lot of the things that went into it, even just the word Habiba itself is, I know Habiba is a Nigerian name, but in Uganda it's Habiba. Yes, Habiba, yes. So in Uganda, it's the name of, it's a kind of person, I don't even know how to describe this person, but the only characteristic of them that anybody knows is they fat fire. And that's it.
They what?
So, fat fire, like fat, F-A-R-T.
They fart fire.
Fart, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Out the butt.
Out of the butt, yes. They're like a dragon. But instead of breathing out fire, the fire comes from the other mouth.
Right.
So when I was writing this story, I was imagining somebody in Uganda who will know what Abiba is. So I never explained anywhere what an Abiba is. Like throughout the whole book, I'll just say, oh, this girl is an Abiba, and that's it. And there's a lot of things, a lot of names and phrases that Ugandans will understand, or that Ugandan will read and know, but probably even people in Kenya will not know. But that said, even within Uganda itself, not everyone knows what Abiba is. Not everyone knows what a Mutwezi is. Not everyone knows what was the other thing. There are a lot of stuff that I put there that were just coming from the cultures that I grew up in. And so for me, like, I follow that rule really very much, which they say, write what you love to read. And so I think probably I'm the first reader of the book. And if I'm reading it and it makes sense to me, then I assume everybody will enjoy it. So I gave this book to a publisher, I think is in Scotland, Gadrick Books, and he liked it. He didn't have a lot of problems because he said he was a fan of language, and he liked, languages and how languages are used in stories. So he didn't give me a lot of trouble. But then he had an editor who was pretty much a bit picky. He was like, I don't even get what an Abiba is. And so I told him, but look, the whole book is about an Abiba. So if you want to know what an Abiba is, then you read the whole book, and at the end of it, you'll know what an Abiba is. I don't have to explain to you that, oh, an Abiba is a kind of witch who does ABCD and all that. So yeah, I never really struggle in that context. And with my films also, it's even way easier with film. Like, the good thing with film, it's very visual. But then, like the most recent one I did called Kifaru. Of course, in the footnotes and the stuff, I kind of explained what Kifaru is. But when telling the film, like, you never have dialogue where somebody is explaining to the other person that, oh, this is a Kifaru, it will kill you, or it will kill this, or this is what a Kifaru does. But I just wrote the story, and I made the film the way I would imagine someone will be telling a story in Uganda that they sent a Kifaru for her and it killed her, or something like that. So I never really struggle with this. But there's always gatekeepers at some point, You write the story, and then it has to go to a publisher somewhere in the West, and that publisher puts on the gatekeeper hat, and they will tell you, oh, what is an Abiba? Or what is Obibi? Obibi is another story that I wrote like a while back, but I also didn't explain what Obibi is, because it was just pretty clear in my head what it is, so I did not need to explain it. But even me, growing up, most of the stories I read, like you mentioned snow and that thing in the Mayor of Casterbridge.
Firmity, man. That thing is plaguing my life because I have to eat it. Firmity. It's been 30 years. I want to eat it. I heard it's a Scottish dish. I'm going to Scotland to try and get me a bowl of
close
firmity.
enough.
So
okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It is basic things like hot dogs. I never had an idea what a hot dog is until way into my 30s. I think I was almost 30 when I realized, oh, this is a hot dog. This is what I've been reading about all my life, but I will find it in every other book. All James Hadley Chase books probably had a person eating a hot dog somewhere. But I will just go and say, oh yeah, nice. It's a hot dog. And I wouldn't know what it is. And there was this joke that we used to have in Uganda, like, are there cold cuts? Or, you know? So I grew up with this in mind also, like, you know, you read a book, you don't have to understand everything as long as the story is, you know, pretty straightforward. And so when I'm writing, I also want the reader not to understand each and every word I've put there, as long as you can get the story. So my biggest problem is always to make sure the reader is engaged in the story and can sympathize with the character, empathize with the character. Those are always my biggest problems. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dilman. We have just about 20 minutes to go, and I would like to take a couple of questions from the audience before we go further. One question that I think is important is the one from Dr. Singhs. Dr. Singhs basically is asking that he wants to hear from each panelist, if they are willing, and I think you are willing, about a story they wrote that is especially important to them and what inspired them and where we can find these stories. So that's one. I'm going to take another one. So Marcelo Lopez asks a question that I think is actually very important. He's asking, what's the defining characteristics of African SF? He's from Chai. Another question. I just want to take all the questions so we can
Sorry, I didn't hear this. I didn't hear this one. What definition of what?
Okay.
Defining
the defining characteristics of African speculative fiction. The Lonely Bird has another question that I think is important. He writes from Child, actually. So hold on. I hope I'm not mixing up the questions.
We're probably not going to remember all these questions. Should we not just take them one at a
time?
time?
Yeah, so let's take the ones you have. Yeah, cool. That's good. So let's take the two that I have. So first one is about your stories. Which one do you feel very strongly about, and what inspired you to?
That's like asking us to choose between our children now.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's always the one that I most recently wrote, because it's reflective of my journey and growth as a writer. I feel like every story I write is, I hope, a little bit better than the story that I wrote before. And so if I had to ask to showcase something, it would definitely be something I've written more recently than in the past. I'm the sort of person that if I could go back and rewrite all my stories, I would, in some ways. But once a story is out there, it's out there. Nothing I can do about it, but except write the next one better. So, yeah, I think that's the best answer I have to that.
So give us the name of a story that you wrote recently and where it can be found.
My most recent story, probably a love song for her canal amid the by Ashkenazi amid the ruins of New Haven. Sorry, it's a long title. The story I wrote for Uncanny, which I think came out earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, it's about two sisters, former con women, who, after I guess you could call it a magical apocalypse, end up running an inn or a small hotel for spirits in the spirit world. And then a guy shows up who's definitely not a spirit. And, it goes from there. So I really like that story, I think, just because it was one of the rare stories that it was one of my rare stories that They're fine. They're fine. I'm sure they're fine.
Nobody's dead.
I hope. God. It was one of those rare stories that I actually wrote not for. Usually, when I write stories, it's because someone has asked me to. That's the only time I can justify, the time and effort and all that. And that's something I definitely need to work on. But it was one of the rare stories that I wrote just because I wanted to write the story. So I really enjoy it. I like the voice. I like the main character's voice. I think she's grumpy and lovable in the best ways, and the story went some surprising places that I myself wasn't expecting. So I really like the way it ends, and yeah, I'd say people go check that out. I wouldn't call it my favorite story, but it is the story I've written most recently, or at least published most recently. So yeah.
I think for me, it's probably I just finished my third draft of my as yet unpublished novel, Dazzling. Now I think it's one of those. Basically, I thought I was going to get published at 17, okay? And I'm glad that didn't happen because I had absolutely nothing to say. So this book has been the culmination of all my life's experience thus far, and all the things that bother me, and all the things I wish I knew. And it's basically a love letter to my ancestors, especially the missing bit of my ancestry, which I don't think I will ever know. And even though I don't think I'm reconciled to never knowing, this book sort of goes a little bit towards, kind of like comforting me a bit. And so Dazzling, I think, which incidentally I should mention, even though it's not been published, won the inaugural Curtis Brown First Novel Prize of 2019. And so you can find an excerpt on the Curtis Brown website. And that's how I got
the winner here now. Plenty wins.
No, and so that's how I got. And so that's, I think, if you wanted to see a bit of what the book was like, there's about 500 words on the Curtis Brown UK website. So you can find that there. But I think for me, it goes some way to, so all the things that we've talked about this evening, it's about having us in our plane and there being other planes of existence, and how to reconcile yourself with your past and your future, even though you don't know what the past may be. But yeah, I wrote that very much myself because I don't know, after my great-grandfather, there's a gap, and that's on both sides of my family. So I grew up with that lack, and it's always bothered me.
Welcome, Dilman.
Yeah, for me, I think it's like the upside it, every story is really important to me. And at the time I'm writing each story, I find it, I think like it's the only thing in the world that I have to live for. So I live the story for a while. So the stories that never make it to the final draft are stories that are not important. But I think if I'm to single out like the one story that I can say, yeah, this is about me. Oh yeah, I've said it really. It's not yet published. I'm hoping it will be published sometime. It will probably be my first book if it comes out in print. My first novel, not my first book, because I have a few books, but they are mostly novellas. So this story is really, I think of it as an emotional biography. Like I grew up in the 80s in Uganda, and at that time we had civil war going on, and I have a disability, so I can't run. And so other children used to tease me and say, when fighting starts, we shall run and leave you behind. And I grew up with that trauma. So all these years I've been trying to, I don't know, it's not like therapy, but I just wanted to write that story. And so I finally wrote it, but it hasn't yet, nobody likes it yet. And they always say, this.
Sure, somebody will soon.
Yeah. They always say the story you love the most is the one that no one will like at all. So maybe it will end up just in my hard drive for the rest of its life. But yeah, that's the story I really think I really looked deep into my own life to get material for it more than any other story. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So for me, I'm going to sell myself here, just blow my own trumpet. So I've got a short story coming out in the British paper anthology, which probably is going to be out next month, if I'm not mistaken. It's an anniversary anthology.
Is that the one that is being edited by Wole Talabi?
Yes, thank you very much. That's the one. So Wole Talabi is the editor, and it's about speculative fiction. It's science fiction, more or less looking into the future. So I've got a story about a young man who is a rainmaker. He's from a family of rainmakers. So he made rain, and it caused a flood in Benin, in the future Benin, and then they had to run away from Earth and go to a different planet. He needed to make rain because the planet was dry and couldn't. His father couldn't, but somehow he had this belief that he could, and then ended up making rain. So that's why it's personal to me, because my mother's family are believed to be rainmakers. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say. They always say, if you want to, in my mom's village, if you want to have a wedding, you go to them and say, please.
What do you mean you don't know if it's true? Please, it's true. Don't disrespect.
Yeah, I've never seen it done. I've seen them be given money to stop rain, and then it doesn't rain.
Take the money, yeah. And then stop the rain.
So last year, I went to my mom's village, and one of my mom's cousins was just talking about the fact that somebody had a wedding the week before, and the guy didn't come to see them. And that for that reason, nobody could come out that day because it rained from morning till night. And if the guy had come to see them, there would have been no rain. And I was like, you guys are rainmakers, yeah? So I thought about writing that story. So one thing I do in my stories, I always try to bring these traditions into them. Like Dilman said, it's one way I feel that we can pass these traditions on by making sure they are written, even if it's just in short stories or in novels, but just have a way to bring them in. So I'm going to go back to the questions that we have and pick a couple of questions, and then we've got like about 10 minutes to go. So let me just pick questions and
you
then
say 10?
Yes.
That was 3.
About 10 minutes. I'm looking at about 10 minutes to go.
I thought we were done at 4:30.
Okay, no, we've got time. We've got time. Virtually got time. We've got like 30 minutes more to go, or 15 minutes more. So we've got time. We've got time. Got time.
I don't know which kind of. Which time are you looking at? Is this some kind of like metaphysics? Where are you exactly?
Okay, no.
I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have the same time.
So apparently, with people like the panel, so we've got some extension of time.
Oh, yeah.
So let's
I'm not sure I can stay as long. I do have a small person who is unhappy.
Yeah, and I keep making sure that mine don't come down the stairs. That's why I keep doing that.
Okay, so there's one question that I saw before. I'm trying to track back to that question because I think it's a very, very important one that has a lot to do with Afro SF. Francesco is asking a question about what's the relationship between African science fiction and Afro SF in the US, the UK. What about the African countries that don't speak English? Are they included in the conversation or not? I think it's kind of important. So, Dilman, let's start with you.
I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm the one who doesn't really like any labels of any kind.
Yeah.
I think all stories are the same, really. And it's more marketing. I don't know whether it's capitalism. I don't know. For some reason, people are obsessed with saying Afro essay for African essay for. At the very least, I use African essay for African sci-fi. At least I do that. But because because I do that because I think of it as a continent thing rather than having it as some kind of cool genre which is separate from actual from other science fictions. So I normally, I don't object when someone says, oh, this is an Afrofuturist or this is an Afro sci-fi guy or something like that. I just say, yeah, I'm one of that. But with me, I don't really pay much attention to those labels. I think like if the story is like if African writers are to grow and to come to themselves, we need or they need they probably need a platform that is a bit different from other platforms, and so that might make a label, that might give rationale to a label. Because if you go to a library somewhere or a bookshop and you look for, oh, I want African or Afro sci-fi or whatever category you have, I want stories in that genre, and then they might pick out your book much quicker than if you just say, I want sci-fi, and there's all the books of all sci-fi writers from around the world. So in that respect, I think maybe those labels mean something, but to me as a person, I just, I just write what I write, because I think I started writing speculatively at the age of 15, that is in the mid-90s. I sold my first horror story, I think, in 2003, 2004, before anyone knew anything about this kind of, I didn't even know what Afrofuturism is or all that kind of stuff. And I remember this person who bought the story, there was a magazine called The Swamp, and he was boasting, when he was posting the story, he was boasting, oh, you guys, I'm always boasting about how international my writers are. Here is Dilman from Uganda. And I was like, yeah, I felt proud. I didn't say Dilman from Africa or Dilman from somewhere. It was just Dilman from Uganda. And this is a horror story from Uganda. And that was, like, that's kind of something that has stuck with me up to today. So at some point when, of course, things began getting mainstream, that is when everybody began coming up with labels and saying, oh, we need to give it a name. We need African sci-fi or African SF or Afro SF or whatever other S term they'll come up with. And yeah, it's cool with me, whatever term comes, whichever term people want to use. But as a person, I don't really pay much attention to it.
Chinelo.
Oh gosh, the question. So I both agree and disagree with Nnedi Okorafor's assertion that African speculative fiction, African sci-fi is different from Afrofuturism. But at the same time, I think it isn't. I think, like Dilman, I think, labels can be useful, but labels can also hold us back and box us in. And so I think that what Black people all over the world, whether we're in Africa or whether we're part of the grand diaspora, are doing are essentially the same thing. We are writing back against global systems that seek to erase, diminish, make us secondary, disappear us, in some cases even do us actual harm and violence. And whether we're doing that from a perspective that is rooted in the concrete understandings of our own history and culture that many Africans are coming from, or whether we're doing that from a perspective where we are imagining those roots because those roots were taken away from us, because we were cut off from them, we're all really doing the same thing. So trying to micro manage and micro splits and genre split hairs can, to me, be sometimes a little counterproductive. That is to say that's not to say that, African speculative fiction doesn't have certain elements that maybe Afrofuturism doesn't, or vice versa. But it's also to say that Africa is not a monolith either, right? When a Nigerian is writing speculative fiction, they're not coming from necessarily the same place that, let's say, a Ugandan is, or Rwandan is, or South African is. We're all dealing with individual contexts that make it that are then incredibly important to the way we're shaping and telling our stories. But ultimately, what we're all trying to do is write ourselves into existence in a really, really fundamental way. Because canon, as we understand it, is often European, it's often white. And whiteness itself, the structure of whiteness, needs Blackness as the thing that it is not. And so when we are writing these great white futures, you can't really have Black people in it, at least not Black people being Black and apologetic about their Blackness. Or it precludes Africans. I think a great example of that is the way that the coronavirus is being covered in a lot of media. When they talk about, what is it that's, they talk as if everybody everywhere is doing terribly. When many African
everybody's
countries,
shocked that Africa is not like underground, overwhelmed.
Right. It's like everybody was expecting us to die. As in, everybody was expecting us to die. And the fact that we haven't, people are like, is it our blood? Is it genetic? Maybe it's something about being Black. Maybe it's the heat. Like, just anyway. So the act of writing the what if, the act of writing and imagining ourselves either in the future or expanding the understanding of what is normal, what is, I want to
push it around to make the point very fast, because we have like 3 minutes to go. So we need to cut from you and get to Chinelo. Chikọdili, sorry.
So basically, the only thing that is African, what makes African speculative fiction is, or Afrofuture, they're all the same thing, essentially, at their core. That's my answer.
Thank you very much. Chikọdili, in a minute.
My own answer is what she said.
Thank you. To round up, so thank you very much, Chikọdili. That's beautiful. So to round up, I'm thinking of, we don't have much time. There's a whole lot to say. I think we're just warming up, and I didn't even know that 1 hour and 30 minutes would go so fast. So thank you guys for being here. But I want us to go out with, now, in Nigeria, in Uganda, what do you guys think the future holds for speculative fiction or genre writing in the continent? And also, where do people need to go if they want to see this writing by Africans in Nigeria, in Uganda, across Africa, and in the diaspora? Where are these stories that we're talking about?
Can I do that in bullet points?
Yeah, bullet point as fast as possible.
I think first and foremost, for your first question, where is it going? I think we will see a lot more of our culture being represented in our literature unapologetically, because there has been a movement that is, it's running counter to the whole white supremacist movement. And I'm hoping that it will grow and it will get bigger and stronger. Now, for where to find our work, or I would say, first of all, Omenana, which was set up for that. But interestingly, a lot more non-African magazines are publishing African writers, and a lot more African magazines are publishing speculative fiction. So it's all out there on the internet.
Thank you. Chinelo?
Actually, exactly what she was going to say. If you want to find African writing, one of the best places to do it is to start personally with Omenana. Brittle Paper is another really great place to find speculative fiction, right? African writing. but yeah, I mean, the Us and Flux project that I wrote for had both me and Ray Muhaki, from Kenya. So, and Tochi Onyebuchi, who's also Nigerian American. So we are popping up everywhere. And if you kind of start with Omenana as a place to like, okay, who are some of the base people, then you can trace where they've gone from there. In a lot of cases, Omenana was kind of the starting point for a lot of people who then were able to jump to and do other things. So the African Speculative Fiction Society has an index on its website that has every story, every speculative story published by an African.
Our time is
going back to 2014. So there, I'll put the link.
Dilman, just close it for us. Our time is up, Dilman. Just close it up. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I think, should I go? But I think, I think, as our governments keep giving us these visions of the future, like Uganda, they have this vision 2040. I think Kenya also has its vision of the future. We are going to see a lot more people trying to write about those visions. I know in Uganda, there are some poets, they're not speculative, but they write in reaction to these visions that the government are putting up. So some of it is mockery, some of it is what, but I see a lot, like as the governments, keep trying to achieve things in future. I see also writers going to begin to imagine what the future is going to look like more and more than we've been doing.
Thank you very much. So thank you guys for coming. Good catching up with you guys again. For those people who are interested in African speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, whatever, Google is your best friend. We are out there, we exist, and we've been doing this for a while, and we'll keep doing that. Like everybody said here, we write for writing's sake. So you could come to omenana.com, Free to Paper, Jalada Africa is here doing great. A whole lot of other people are doing a lot of very, very good stuff that you will want to check out. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Chinelo. Thank you, Chikọdili. Thank you, Dilman. So nice to catch up with you guys again. So thank you very much for.
It was lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. I think we are just starting and we're ending.
Say hi to the human.
Will do. Take care.
Bye.
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 Yeah. I don't know if it's off. I'm still